Snow battered the frosted windows of the diner like shattered glass. But the real danger wasn't the storm outside. It was the secret shivering by the dumpsters. When a struggling waitress finds two terrified, freezing little girls in $1,000 coats, she thinks she's just doing the right thing by taking them in. She didn't know their father was Dominic Castile, the most ruthless crime boss in Chicago, or that a rival syndicate was currently hunting those children to finish a bloodline. One act of kindness dragged her into a deadly underworld and sparked a dangerous romance that would rewrite the rules of the city. The neon sign of Peterson's All-American Diner flickered a sickly, dying pink against the relentless Chicago blizzard. It was past midnight on a Tuesday in late January, the kind of cold that stole the breath from your lungs and turned the city streets into an abandoned, icy wasteland. Clara Hayes wiped down the cracked linoleum counter for the fourth time, her hands raw and smelling faintly of industrial bleach and stale coffee. She was 24, exhausted down to her marrow, and surviving on a diet of leftover fries and the sheer, stubborn will to make next month's rent. Hank, the grumpy 60-year-old owner, yelled from the back office, his voice muffled by the clatter of dishware. "Lock it up, Clara. I'm not paying you to stand around and watch the snow fall. Anyone dumb enough to be out in this weather deserves to starve." "Almost done, Hank," Clara called back, wringing out her rag. She untied her grease-stained apron, the fabric stiff with the evening's rush. The diner had been dead for hours, the storm keeping even the most desperate insomniacs away. She grabbed her heavy wool coat, bought from a thrift store 3 winters ago and currently missing 2 buttons, and braced herself for the walk to the train station. Clara pushed through the heavy glass doors, instantly assaulted by the biting wind. The alley beside the diner was a dark wind tunnel, swirling with aggressive flurries. As she turned the collar of her coat up, a sound stopped her dead in her tracks. It was faint, a high-pitched, rattling noise that didn't sound like the wind or the groan of the metal dumpsters. Clara froze, her breath pluming in the icy air. She squinted into the suffocating darkness of the alley. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Just the howl of the storm. She took a step back towards the street, survival instincts screaming at her to keep walking. But the sound came again, a distinct, fragile whimper. Pulling her phone from her pocket and turning on the flashlight, Clara stepped cautiously into the alley. The beam of light cut through the falling snow, illuminating discarded cardboard boxes, overflowing trash bags, and finally, a small, huddled mass pressed desperately against the brick wall, shielded by a stack of wooden pallets. Clara gasped, dropping to her knees despite the slush soaking instantly through her jeans. It was 2 children, little girls. The older one, perhaps 7 years old, had her arms wrapped fiercely around a smaller girl who couldn't have been more than 4. They were shivering so violently that their teeth chattered in a terrifying, rhythmic clatter. What struck Clara instantly, beyond the sheer horror of children out in sub-zero temperatures, was what they were wearing. Beneath the layer of snow and grime, the girls were draped in wool coats that looked like they belonged in a Parisian boutique, complete with velvet collars and silk linings. But the coats were torn, smeared with something dark and sticky, and the girls' feet were shoved into expensive waterlogged leather boots that offered no protection against the frost. "Oh my God," Clara breathed, reaching out. The older girl flinched violently, her eyes wide and feral in the flashlight beam. She pushed the younger girl behind her. "Don't touch us," she croaked, her voice raw and damaged. Hey, it's okay," Clara said softly, keeping her hands visible. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm Clara. You're freezing. You're going to die out here." "Can't go to the police," the girl whispered, her blue eyes filled with an ancient, paralyzing terror that didn't belong on a child's face. "The men with badges are the bad guys. They hurt Mummy." A cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather washed over Clara. The men with badges. She didn't have time to unpack the implications of that statement. The younger girl let out a weak, pitiful moan, her eyes fluttering shut, her skin taking on a dangerous, bluish, translucent hue. Hypothermia was setting in fast. "I won't call the police," Clara promised instantly, acting on pure adrenaline. "But you have to come inside, right now. I have warm food and it's safe. Please." The older girl stared at her, assessing Clara's worn coat and desperate expression. Finally, she gave a microscopic nod. Clara didn't hesitate. She scooped the younger, unresponsive girl into her arms. She weighed practically nothing. "Grab my coat," Clara instructed the older girl. Together they hurried back to the diner's side door. Clara unlocked it with trembling fingers, shoving them inside just as Hank's truck engine roared to life in the front lot, his headlights sweeping the street before he drove off into the storm. They were alone. The blast of the diner's heating system hit them like a physical force. Clara locked the deadbolt, pulled the blinds shut tight, and carried the youngest girl to a booth near the kitchen. She stripped off the girl's ruined coat, tossing it aside, and wrapped her in a thick fleece blanket Hank kept in the back for emergencies. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Clara asked the older girl, who stood shivering by the table, refusing to sit. "Lily," she whispered, "and this is Mia." "Okay, Lily, I'm going to make you both some hot chocolate and soup. You sit down. Wrap up in this." Clara tossed her another blanket. As Clara rushed behind the counter, firing up the burner to heat some of the leftover chicken noodle soup, she stole glances at the girls. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, the dark, sticky substance on their expensive coats became undeniable. It was blood. And looking at the uninjured, pristine skin of the girls as they warmed up, Clara knew with a sinking certainty that the blood didn't belong to them. She brought over 2 steaming bowls of soup and mugs of cocoa. Lily watched her with suspicious, hawkish eyes, before practically burying her face in the bowl. Mia, reviving slightly from the warmth, ate slowly, fed by her older sister's trembling hands. "Where are your parents, Lily?" Clara asked gently, sitting across from them. Lily stopped eating. Her face went completely blank, a terrifying mask of trauma. "Mummy told us to run. She locked the car doors and told us to run into the alley and not come out. Then the loud bangs happened, and the men in the suits and the badges looked for us." Clara swallowed hard. She reached into her pocket, gripping her phone. Every rational instinct told her to dial 911. But Lily's words echoed in her head. The men with badges are the bad guys. Whoever these children belonged to, they were involved in something terrifying. If the police were corrupt, handing them over could be a death sentence. "Okay," Clara said, making a decision that would alter the course of her existence forever. "You're coming home with me." Across the city, far from the run-down streets of Clara's neighborhood, a different kind of storm was raging. The penthouse office of the Castile Syndicate was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Chicago skyline, dark mahogany, and expensive leather. But tonight, it felt like a tomb. Dominic Castile stood by the window, a highball glass of untouched amber scotch in his hand. He was 32, a man carved from marble and ruthlessness. His tailored Italian suit jacket was discarded on a chair, his tie ripped away, the top buttons of his shirt undone to reveal the faint edge of a scar on his collarbone. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, were currently hollowed out by a violently suppressed grief. The door to the office clicked open. Leo, his underboss and oldest friend, stepped inside. Leo's face was grim, his knuckles bruised and split. "Talk," Dominic commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded absolute obedience. "We found the SUV," Leo said, his voice heavy, "under the overpass on 4th Street. It's bad, Dom." Dominic didn't turn around. His grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Isabella?" Leo paused for a fraction of a second. "Gone. The paramedics were already there, called in by an anonymous tip. But, Dom, the girls weren't in the car. The back doors were open. There's no sign of Lily or Mia." The glass in Dominic's hand shattered. Whiskey and blood dripped onto the pristine Persian rug, but he didn't even flinch. He turned slowly, his eyes burning with a hellish, devastating fire. Who? The hit has Victor Rossi's fingerprints all over it, but the execution was sloppy. They used off-duty cops on Rossi's payroll to pull Isabella over. That's why she stopped. But she must have realized what was happening. She got the girls out before they opened fire. My daughters are out there in a blizzard with a hit squad looking for them, Dominic said, every word dripping with lethal intent. He walked over to his desk, pulling a heavy, matte black Sig Sauer from the drawer and checking the magazine. Tear the city apart, Leo. I want every alley, every dumpster, every abandoned building checked. You put every man we have on the streets. And bring me Victor Rossi's brother. If Rossi wants to slaughter my family, I will erase his entire bloodline from the earth. We're already tracking the dirty cops, Leo assured him. They haven't found the girls either. They're panicking. They have 4 hours, Dominic stated, walking past Leo toward the door. If I don't have my daughters back by sunrise, Chicago will burn. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Clara was ushering the girls into a tiny, 1-bedroom apartment. The radiator clanked loudly, fighting a losing battle against the drafty windows, but it was a paradise compared to the alley. Clara locked the deadbolt, fastened the chain, and pulled the flimsy curtains shut. The apartment was cramped, filled with second-hand furniture and stacks of library books, but it was clean. She ran a warm bath, gently coaxing the girls into the water to wash away the grime and the freezing cold. As she washed their hair with cheap strawberry shampoo, she noticed the custom stitching on their ruined clothes, CSS. She found some of her old oversized t-shirts for them to wear as nightgowns. Once they were bundled in her bed, buried under every blanket she owned, the exhaustion finally seemed to overtake the adrenaline in the girls' systems. Mia fell asleep almost instantly, clutching a worn teddy bear Clara had kept since childhood. Lily, however, fought sleep. She watched Clara from the bed, her eyes heavy but guarded. "You should sleep, Lily. You're safe here," Clara whispered, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "Are you going to sell us?" Lily asked bluntly. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "What? Goodness, no. Why would you ask something so awful?" "Because Daddy is rich," Lily stated matter-of-factly. "People always want his money, and Mummy said if anyone found out who we were, they would use us to hurt him." Clara swallowed, her heart pounding. "Who is your daddy, Lily?" Lily shook her head stubbornly. "Can't tell. Mummy said it's a secret." Clara didn't push. She stroked Lily's damp hair until the little girl's eyes finally fluttered shut. Once she was sure they were deeply asleep, Clara walked into her tiny kitchen and pulled out her laptop. She sat at the wobbly table, staring at the search engine. She typed in, "Chicago, mother killed in car, 2 daughters." Nothing recent came up, just local news about the snowstorm and standard traffic accidents. The police clearly hadn't released any information. Or worse, the corrupt cops were covering it up while they hunted the girls. She pulled the torn, bloody coat from a plastic bag where she had stashed it. She checked the pockets carefully. Inside the inner lining of Lily's coat, she felt a small, hard lump. She carefully worked it out of the fabric. It was a heavy silver money clip, embossed with a distinct crest, a roaring lion holding a dagger, and the initials DC. Clara stared at it. DC. Her hands shook as she typed Chicago DC Lion Dagger Crest into the search bar. The results loaded instantly, and Clara felt all the blood drain from her face. Dominic Castile, head of the Castile Crime Syndicate. Ruthless, untouchable, the king of the Chicago underworld. Articles detailed his rise to power, alleged extortions, and violent territorial wars. There were photos of a terrifyingly handsome, hard-eyed man walking out of courthouses, completely unbothered by the flashing cameras. Clara slammed the laptop shut, her breathing erratic. She had just kidnapped the daughters of a Mafia boss. If the rival gang didn't kill her for hiding them, Dominic Castile would certainly execute her just for touching them. She was a dead woman, walking. By 6 a.m. the blizzard had broken, leaving the city buried under 2 feet of snow. The silence of the morning was heavy and tense. Dominic stood in a derelict warehouse on the south side, the air smelling of rust, damp concrete, and fear. Tied to a metal chair in the center of the room was one of Victor Rossi's lieutenants. The man was bleeding profusely from his nose, sobbing and begging for his life. Dominic wiped a drop of blood off his knuckles with a pristine white handkerchief. He was operating on 0 sleep, fueled solely by a terrifying, cold rage. "I'm going to ask you one last time," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. "Where are my girls?" "I don't know. I swear to God, Castile," the man choked out, spitting a tooth onto the floor. "The hit, it went wrong. The cops said the wife threw the kids out of the car before they cornered her. They searched the whole grid, but the brats vanished. Someone must have taken them." Dominic's jaw tightened. If someone took them, they'd be asking for a ransom by now. Leo burst through the heavy iron doors of the warehouse, holding a tablet. "Dom, we got something." Dominic dropped the handkerchief and closed the distance in 3 strides. "What?" "We had our tech guys scrub all the security cameras in a 10-block radius of the hit. Most of them were frozen over or blinded by the snow. But a camera at an ATM near an alley off 5th Avenue caught something. It's grainy, but look." Leo played the footage. It showed a figure in a heavy, oversized coat rushing out of an alley, carrying a small bundle, leading another small figure by the hand. They hurried into the side door of a diner. "Peterson's All-American," Leo noted. "We tracked the employee records. The only person closing last night was a waitress. Clara Hayes, 24. Clean record, no criminal ties. She lives in an apartment complex 3 miles from there." Dominic stared at the screen, his eyes locking onto the blurry image of the woman carrying his youngest child. A million thoughts raced through his mind. Was she a civilian who got involved, or an opportunist realizing she just stumbled onto a gold mine? "Give me the address," Dominic ordered, racking the slide of his gun and slipping it into his shoulder holster. "Dom, let me send a team." "No," Dominic interrupted, his eyes flashing. "I'm going. Nobody touches them but me." 20 minutes later, a fleet of 3 black armored SUVs pulled up silently to the curb outside a dilapidated, brick apartment building in a run-down neighborhood. The snow muffled the sound of the heavy doors shutting. Dominic stepped out, his dark overcoat billowing in the biting wind. He looked up at the cheap, rusted fire escapes. He didn't wait for his men. He walked straight through the broken front door of the lobby, Leo right behind him. They bypassed the elevator, taking the stairs to the 3rd floor 2 at a time. Dominic's heart, which had felt like a dead stone in his chest all night, was pounding with a violent, terrifying rhythm. Apartment 3B. Dominic didn't bother knocking. He raised his heavy boot and kicked the cheap wooden door squarely near the handle. The deadbolt splintered the door frame, and the door flew open with a deafening crash. Dominic stormed into the room, his gun drawn and leveled, his eyes scanning for threats. "Daddy!" The scream wasn't one of terror, but of absolute, raw relief. Dominic froze. The apartment was tiny and smelled faintly of cheap vanilla candles and toast. Sitting on a frayed floral sofa in the center of the living room was the waitress, Clara Hayes. She was wearing faded jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Sitting on either side of her, wrapped in fluffy, mismatched blankets, were his daughters. Clara let out a short, terrified scream as the door shattered, instinctively throwing her arms over both girls to shield them from the armed men invading her home. But Lily was already wriggling out from under Clara's protective grip. She launched herself across the small room. Dominic dropped his gun to the floor. It hit the cheap rug with a heavy thud as he fell to his knees, catching his daughter as she crashed into his chest. He buried his face in Lily's hair, his broad shoulders shaking violently as he pulled her tight against him. A sound escaped him. A rough, broken sound of a man who had just had his soul handed back to him. Mia scrambled off the couch a second later, running on bare feet to join them. Dominic gathered them both into his arms, kissing their heads, their faces, holding them as if he could absorb them back into his own body to keep them safe forever. "I got you. I got you," he kept murmuring, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. Daddy's here." Clara remained frozen on the sofa. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a trapped bird against her ribs. She looked from the terrifying, heavily armed men filling her doorway to the ruthless Mafia boss, currently weeping on her floor as he held his children. Dominic Castile was supposed to be a monster. The articles called him the Devil of Chicago. But looking at him now, Clara didn't see a monster. She saw a father who loved his children fiercely. Slowly, Dominic pulled back from the girls. He wiped his face, his expression hardening back into the mask of the syndicate boss as he remembered where he was. He stood up, towering over the small living room. His dark, intense gaze locked onto Clara. The air in the room instantly grew heavy. Leo and the other men in the hallway shifted, waiting for a command. Clara stood up slowly, her knees trembling. She forced herself to meet his terrifying gaze. I didn't call the police," she stammered, her voice shaking but surprisingly clear. "Lily told me the men with badges were the ones who hurt their mother. I didn't know who you were until an hour ago. I was just trying to keep them warm." Dominic stepped closer to her. He was impossibly tall up close, radiating danger, power, and an expensive cologne that smelled of cedar and smoke. He looked down at her, taking in her pale face, her defensive posture, and the undeniable fact that she had shielded his daughters with her own body when the door burst open. "You found them in the storm," he stated, his voice a low baritone that sent a strange shiver down her spine. "By the dumpsters at my work," Clara replied, refusing to back down, though her hands were clenching the fabric of her sweater. "They were freezing. I couldn't leave them." Dominic stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He was a man used to people cowering before him, lying to him, trying to leverage anything they could for money or power. He expected this waitress to beg for a reward or to tremble and cry. Instead, she was looking right back at him, terrified but defiant, protecting her space. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap furniture, the utter poverty she lived in. Yet, she hadn't sold his daughters out. "You know who I am," Dominic said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clara breathed. "Dominic Castile." Dominic reached into his jacket pocket. Clara flinched, bracing herself, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills, easily $10,000, bound with a rubber band. He tossed it onto the coffee table. "Pack a bag," he ordered. Clara blinked in confusion. "What? No, that's okay. You don't have to give me money. I just..." "Wait, pack a bag?" "You're coming with us," Dominic said, turning his back to her to pick up Mia. "Victor Rossi's men are looking for the woman who took my kids. The second they check those cameras and track you here, this building gets leveled with you inside it." "I can't just leave," Clara protested, panic rising. "I have a job, a life here." Dominic turned back, his dark eyes flashing with a sudden, intense heat that made her breath catch. "Your life as you knew it ended the second you picked up my daughters in that alley, Clara. You belong to the Castile family now." The convoy of armored black Mercedes G-Wagons tore through the icy, snow-banked streets of Chicago, leaving the grim reality of Clara's old life in the rearview mirror. Clara sat rigidly in the plush leather back seat of the lead vehicle, Mia fast asleep against her shoulder, while Lily clutched Clara's hand with a vice-like grip. Dominic sat opposite them, a silent, brooding monolith. He was constantly checking his encrypted phone, firing off rapid, terse commands to his underboss, Leo, who rode shotgun. The sheer magnitude of the situation was finally crashing down on Clara. She wasn't just in a car. She was in a mobile command center for a localized war. 45 minutes later, the iron gates of a sprawling limestone estate in Lake Forest groaned open. The property sat on a cliffside overlooking the freezing, turbulent grey waters of Lake Michigan. High stone walls topped with security cameras and razor wire enclosed the grounds, while heavily armed men in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter with trained Dobermans. It was a palace built for a king, functioning as a fortress for a warlord. "Welcome to Sheridan Road," Dominic said softly, breaking the suffocating silence as the SUV parked inside a massive heated garage. Mrs. Gable, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, wearing a crisp grey uniform, met them in the grand foyer. The entryway was an intimidating display of wealth, a cascading crystal chandelier, imported Italian marble floors, and sweeping dual staircases. Clara felt acutely aware of her frayed jeans, scuffed boots, and the fact that all her worldly possessions were currently stuffed into a single, battered canvas duffel bag. "Mr. Castile, thank God," Mrs. Gable breathed, her stoic facade breaking as she saw the girls. "Have the East Wing secured, Mrs. Gable," Dominic ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Post 2 guards at the corridor entrance. Clara will be staying in the suite adjoining the girls' bedroom." "Me?" Clara blinked, stepping back. I thought you were just hiding me until it was safe. I can stay in a guest room down the hall or—" "No!" Lily's voice pierced the air, sharp and panicked. The 7-year-old dropped her father's hand and lunged for Clara, burying her face in Clara's cheap sweater. "Don't leave us! The bad men will come back!" Dominic's expression tightened. He was a man who commanded thousands of loyal soldiers, yet he was entirely powerless against the terrified plea of his traumatized daughter. He looked at Clara, his dark eyes stripping away her defenses, laying bare a desperate, silent request. "Stay with them, please." "You're not going anywhere, Clara," Dominic said, his tone softening just a fraction, exclusively for his daughter's benefit. "You'll stay in the adjoining suite. Whatever you need, Mrs. Gable will provide. Clothes, food, anything." For the next 3 days, Clara became a ghost haunting a billionaire's mansion. The estate was a gilded cage. She learned quickly that Dominic Castile's world was sharply divided into 2 distinct realms. Downstairs, in the heavily soundproofed basement offices and the mahogany-panelled library, he was the ruthless head of the syndicate. Clara would occasionally hear the muffled shouts of men, the heavy thud of fists against wood, and the chilling, commanding bark of Dominic's voice orchestrating the systematic destruction of Victor Rossi's organization. But upstairs, in the sunlit, pastel-colored sanctuary of the East Wing, he tried to be just a father. It was a staggering dichotomy. On Thursday evening, Clara watched from the doorway of the playroom as Dominic, still wearing a bespoke charcoal suit jacket, an empty shoulder holster strapped to his chest, sat cross-legged on a Loro Piana cashmere rug, letting Mia brutally aggressively brush his dark hair with a pink plastic comb. "You missed a spot, Daddy," Mia chirped, completely oblivious to the fact that the man indulging her had likely ordered a hit on a rival warehouse an hour prior. "My apologies, Princess," Dominic murmured, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. It transformed his face, erasing the lethal edge and revealing a staggering, devastatingly handsome man beneath the monster. He caught Clara watching him. The smile faded, replaced by that intense, calculating stare that always made Clara's pulse skip a beat. He patted Mia's head and stood up, walking over to Clara in the hall. "They're doing better," Dominic said quietly, keeping his voice low. "Because of you. They haven't had night terrors since you got here." "They're resilient," Clara replied, wrapping her arms around her waist. "But they miss their mother. Lily asks about Isabella sometimes. I don't know what to tell her." A shadow crossed Dominic's face, dark and absolute. He looked away, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Isabella and I. We weren't a fairy tale, Clara. It was an arranged marriage to merge 2 territories. We respected each other, but we lived separate lives. She wanted out of Chicago. She was taking the girls to a safe house in Vermont when Rossi's men intercepted them." He stepped closer, invading Clara's personal space, the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of cold winter air. She died trying to protect them. But you kept them alive. You are the reason my bloodline still exists. Clara swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. I just did what anyone would do. No, Dominic countered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her gaze again. Anyone else would have run. Anyone else would have called the cops and washed their hands of it. You walked into a storm for them. Don't underestimate what you did, Clara, or what it means to me. Before Clara could process the heavy implication of his words, heavy boots pounded up the marble staircase. Leo appeared at the end of the hall, out of breath, his face pale. "Dom," Leo said, ignoring Clara entirely. "Turn on the news. Channel 4. Now." Dominic grabbed the remote from the hall console and flicked on the massive flat screen mounted in the adjacent sitting room. Clara followed him, a cold sense of dread pooling in her stomach. The local news anchor appeared, standing in front of a roaring, multi-story inferno. Plumes of thick black smoke choked the Chicago night sky. Fire crews are battling a massive, suspicious blaze at a 3-story apartment complex on the city's south side. Authorities say the fire started on the 3rd floor and spread rapidly due to an accelerant. Fortunately, a massive snowstorm kept most residents out of the building due to a burst pipe earlier today, but officials are calling this a targeted arson. Clara's knees buckled. The camera panned, showing the rusted fire escape and the crumbling brickwork. It was her building. The fire was raging exactly where her 3rd-floor apartment used to be. The tiny living room where she had hidden Lily and Mia, the worn floral sofa, her mother's photographs, her entire meager life, incinerated in minutes. Dominic caught her arm before she hit the floor, his grip iron-strong but remarkably gentle. He pulled her up, supporting her weight against his solid chest. "Rossi," Dominic snarled at Leo, his voice laced with pure, unadulterated venom. His men tracked the security footage from the diner, Leo confirmed grimly. They figured out who she was. They thought she was still hiding the girls there. Dom, they didn't just burn it to flush them out. They rigged the doors from the outside. If Clara and the girls had been in there. Leo didn't have to finish the sentence. If Dominic hadn't kicked down her door and forced her into his SUV 3 days ago, she and those 2 little girls would have burned alive. Clara let out a ragged sob, burying her face in her hands. She was trembling violently, the reality of the Mafia world finally sinking its teeth into her. She had nothing. No home, no clothes, no past. Everything she was had just been erased by a man she had never even met. "Get out, Leo," Dominic commanded. Leo nodded and vanished down the stairs. Dominic turned Clara around, forcing her to look at him. His large hands cupped her face, his thumbs gently wiping away the hot tears spilling over her cheeks. It was an astonishingly tender gesture from a man whose hands were built for violence. "Look at me," Dominic ordered softly. "Clara, look at me." She forced her tear-filled eyes to meet his. "I am sorry," he said, and for the first time, the King of Chicago sounded entirely vulnerable. "I brought this war to your doorstep. You lost everything because of me." "I have nothing," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm a ghost." "You have me," Dominic said fiercely, the words slipping out with a raw, undeniable truth that shocked them both. The air between them suddenly crackled, thick and heavy with an electric tension that had been building since the moment he saw her shielding his children. "Rossi took your home. I will buy you the world to replace it. But you are not a ghost, Clara. You are the most real thing in this entire God-forsaken house." He leaned in, the distance between them evaporating. Clara didn't pull away. She was drowning in the chaos of her ruined life, and Dominic Castile, the monster of Chicago, was suddenly the only solid ground she had left to stand on. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, the ragged hitch in his breathing. His gaze dropped to her mouth, his hands sliding from her cheeks down to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. Clara closed her eyes, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, anticipating the collision. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the library downstairs slammed open. "Boss!" a guard yelled from the bottom of the stairs, panic lacing his voice. Dominic froze, his forehead resting against Clara's for one agonizing second before he pulled away. The mask of the syndicate boss slammed back into place, cold and impenetrable. He drew his weapon from his holster in a fluid, practiced motion. "Stay here," Dominic hissed, pushing Clara behind him. "Lock the door to the girls' room." He bounded down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Clara, terrified but unable to hide, crept to the balcony overlooking the grand foyer. Leo and 3 other heavily armed guards were dragging a bleeding, bruised man into the center of the marble floor. Clara recognized him instantly. It was Donovan, one of the daytime security guards who usually patrolled the East Wing corridors near her room. "Found him trying to slip out the servant's entrance with a burner phone," Leo spat, kicking the back of Donovan's knees, forcing him to the ground before Dominic. Dominic walked slowly towards the man, his gun held casually at his side, but his eyes were black with murder. "You've been with my family for 5 years, Donovan," Dominic said quietly. The deadly calm in his voice was far more terrifying than if he had been screaming. Donovan spat blood onto the pristine marble. "Rossi pays better, and he doesn't care about collateral damage." "Who gave Rossi the route Isabella was taking to Vermont?" Dominic asked, cocking the hammer of his gun. "I did," Donovan sneered, though his hands were shaking violently. "And I just sent him the blueprints to this estate. Rossi isn't just sending a hit squad, Castile. He's sending an army. He knows the Waitress and the brats are in the East Wing. He's coming to finish the job tonight." A chilling alarm suddenly shrieked through the mansion, a high-pitched, deafening wail. The perimeter sensors had been breached. The war hadn't just reached their doorstep. It had just broken inside. The deafening shriek of the perimeter alarm shattered the fragile peace of the estate. Red emergency lights pulsed to life, bathing the grand foyer in a sinister, bloody glow. Dominic didn't hesitate. He didn't ask Donovan another question. He simply raised his weapon and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the cavernous hall, a brutal punctuation mark that signaled the beginning of a war. Donovan slumped to the marble floor, lifeless. Dominic's head snapped up to the balcony where Clara was frozen in terror. "Clara, get the girls! Go to the panic room in the sub-basement, now!" Gunfire erupted from the front lawn, the heavy, rhythmic thud of automatic rifles clashing with the sharp cracks of his security detail returning fire. The reinforced mahogany front doors shuddered as something massive rammed into them. Clara broke from her paralysis. She sprinted down the hallway, her bare feet slipping on the polished hardwood. She threw open the heavy oak door to the girls' suite. Lily was already sitting up in bed, her eyes wide, pulling a terrified, crying Mia against her chest. The trauma of the alley had instantly reawakened. "Clara!" Lily screamed over the wail of the sirens. "I'm here! I'm right here!" Clara rushed to the bed, scooping Mia into her arms and grabbing Lily's hand. "We have to go. We're going to play a hiding game, okay? Just like your mum taught you." Lily nodded, her face deathly pale but completely silent. She was a Mafia princess. She knew the drill. Clara dragged them out into the corridor. The mansion was descending into pure chaos. Men in black tactical gear were sprinting past them, weapons drawn, shouting coordinates. The smell of sulfur and burning wood began to seep through the ventilation system. They reached the top of the servants' staircase that led down to the kitchens and the sub-basement. Mrs. Gable was there, clutching a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, her grey hair escaping her usually immaculate bun. "Hurry, dear. The panic room is past the wine cellar," Mrs. Gable urged, ushering them down the narrow, dimly lit steps. But as they reached the ground floor landing, a terrifying realization slammed into Clara with the force of a physical blow. She grabbed the handrail, stopping dead in her tracks. Donovan gave them the blueprints. "Wait!" Clara gasped, pulling the girls back. "Mrs. Gable, the security guard. Donovan." "He gave Victor Rossi the blueprints to the estate." Mrs. Gable's face drained of all color. "Dear God in heaven. The panic room. It's reinforced against outside attacks. But if they have the blueprints, they know where the ventilation override is. They could trap us in there and pump in gas. It's a steel coffin." A massive explosion rocked the foundation of the house, throwing Clara against the wall. Dust and plaster rained down from the ceiling. The front doors had been breached. The shouting of strange, violent men echoed from the grand foyer, followed immediately by the sickening sound of close-quarters combat. "Where do we go?" Clara demanded, panic threatening to choke her. "If we can't use the panic room, where?" Mrs. Gable's eyes darted frantically. Then they locked onto an antique tapestry hanging at the end of the servants' corridor. "The Prohibition tunnels," she whispered. "This house was built in the 1920s by a bootlegger. There's a dry storage chute behind that tapestry that leads to an unmapped smuggling tunnel. It exits near the cliffside. The current cartel doesn't know about it. Dominic only found it when we renovated the pipes last year." "Lead the way," Clara said fiercely. They sprinted down the hall. Gunshots were getting louder, echoing off the marble floors above them. They could hear Leo yelling orders, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground. Mrs. Gable tore the tapestry down, revealing a rusted iron latch set into the stone wall. She threw her entire weight against it. It groaned, resisting, before finally giving way with a loud scrape, revealing a pitch-black, narrow chute. "Go! Slide down!" Mrs. Gable ordered. Clara went first, bracing herself against the damp stone as she slid down a steep incline into absolute darkness. She hit a dirt floor a second later, the air smelling of ancient earth and freezing lake water. "Lily, come on!" Clara called up. Lily slid down flawlessly, landing in Clara's arms. Mia was next, crying softly, clutching Clara's neck like a lifeline. Mrs. Gable was about to follow when heavy boots rounded the corner of the corridor above. "Over here! I found a hidden door!" a gruff voice yelled. Mrs. Gable looked down the chute at Clara, her eyes filled with a sad, resolute finality. "Keep them safe, Clara. Tell Mr. Castile I served the family until the end." "Mrs. Gable, no!" Clara screamed. The older woman slammed the heavy iron door shut from the outside. The lock clicked into place, plunging Clara and the girls into suffocating, absolute darkness. A second later, 2 muffled gunshots rang out through the stone. Clara clamped her hand over her own mouth to stifle a sob, wrapping her other arm around the girls. They were trapped underground, blind and shivering. "Clara," Lily whispered, her voice trembling in the dark. "Is Mrs. Gable gone?" "I don't know, baby," Clara lied, hot tears streaming down her face. She felt along the dirt walls until she found a narrow passageway. "Come on, we have to keep moving. Hold on to my sweater. Don't let go." Above ground, the Castile estate had turned into an abattoir. Dominic moved through his home like an apex predator, a terrifying force of nature devoid of mercy. His suit was ruined, splashed with the blood of Rossi's men. He held a custom AR-15, moving with lethal precision alongside Leo. They had managed to bottleneck the invaders in the grand foyer, turning the sweeping staircases into an insurmountable high ground. But Victor Rossi hadn't sent an army just to shoot up the house. He had sent them to find the girls. "Dom!" Leo shouted over the gunfire, reloading his weapon behind a marble pillar. "They're falling back. They're splitting up to search the wings." "Hold the line here," Dominic roared. He dropped the empty rifle, drawing his sidearm, and sprinted toward the east wing. Every man who stepped into his path was met with a deadly, calculated double tap to the chest. He was fighting for his territory, yes, but more importantly, he was fighting for his soul. Clara and his daughters were the only things tethering him to his humanity. He reached the servants' stairwell, finding the bodies of 2 of his men, and then he saw her. Mrs. Gable lay at the end of the corridor, a pool of blood expanding beneath her grey uniform. Dominic dropped to his knees, his heart seizing. Gable. The older woman wasn't dead. She coughed, her eyes fluttering open. Mr. Castile, she wheezed. The tunnels, they took the chute. Dominic looked up at the closed iron door behind her. The tapestry was torn down. The prohibition tunnels. He squeezed her hand. Medics are coming. Hold on. He didn't wait. He threw his shoulder against the iron door, unlocking it and sliding down the chute into the pitch-black abyss. He pulled a heavy tactical flashlight from his belt, the blinding beam cutting through the dust. "Clara!" he bellowed, his voice echoing endlessly down the stone corridor. Deep within the tunnels, Clara heard the echo. She had her back pressed against a damp, freezing brick wall, holding a heavy, rusted iron spike she had found on the dirt floor. She had tucked the girls into a small alcove behind her. Footsteps were approaching fast, heavy, purposeful boots splashing in the shallow puddles of the tunnel. Clara stepped out from the alcove, raising the heavy iron spike, her hands shaking violently. If this was one of Rossi's men who had found another way in, she was going to fight until her last breath. She wasn't a Mafia soldier. She was just a waitress from a diner. But looking back at those two little girls huddled in the dark, she knew she was capable of killing to protect them. A blinding light hit her face. Clara swung the iron spike with all her might. A large, calloused hand caught her wrist mid-swing, the grip like a steel vice. "Clara!" a rough, breathless voice commanded. She dropped the spike, her knees giving out completely. Dominic caught her, his flashlight illuminating her tear-streaked, dirt-smudged face. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and blood clung to him, but to Clara, it was the most comforting scent in the world. "Daddy!" Lily and Mia scrambled out of the alcove, burying themselves into Dominic's legs. He dropped to his knees again, enveloping all three of them in a fierce, desperate embrace in the freezing dark of the tunnel. "You're safe," Dominic repeated, burying his face in Clara's neck, his voice cracking. "I've got you. They're dead. Rossi's men are dead." It took 2 hours for the police, the ones Dominic actually owned, to arrive and clear the perimeter. The estate was a ruin of shattered glass and bullet holes, but the core of the Castile family remained untouched. As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the freezing, turbulent waters in violent shades of pink and gold, Clara sat on the edge of the master bed in the secure west wing. The girls were finally asleep, exhausted by terror and adrenaline. Dominic stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the ruined gates of his empire. He had washed the blood from his hands, wearing a clean white shirt, but the exhaustion etched into his features was profound. He turned to look at her. "Victor Rossi was found dead in his penthouse an hour ago," Dominic said quietly. "Leo handled it. The war is over." Clara nodded slowly, pulling a thick cashmere blanket around her shoulders. "What happens now?" Dominic walked over to her, his dark eyes intense and unreadable. He knelt on the floor in front of her, taking her small, bruised hands in his massive ones. "When I found you in that tunnel, holding that piece of iron, ready to die for children that weren't yours." Dominic swallowed hard, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "I realized something, Clara." "What?" she whispered, her heart kicking up a frantic rhythm. "I have spent my entire life building walls, armor, syndicate loyalty. Everything was designed to protect me and my bloodline," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "But the strongest armor I have ever encountered was a 24-year-old waitress in a cheap winter coat. You didn't just save my daughters, Clara. You saved me." He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gentle, agonizing reverence. "You lost your apartment because of me. You lost your normal life," Dominic continued, his gaze piercing straight through to her soul. "I cannot give you normal. I am the devil of Chicago, and this world is violent and dark. But if you stay, if you let me keep you, I swear on my life, you will never be cold, you will never be hungry, and you will never face the dark alone again." Clara looked down at the ruthless Mafia boss kneeling before her, offering her a kingdom built on blood, but ruled by an undeniable, fierce love. She looked past him, to the bedroom door where Lily and Mia slept peacefully, completely unaware of the monsters that had been slain for them tonight. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She had found a family in the most terrifying place imaginable. Clara slid her hands out of his grip and reached up, cupping his strong jaw. She leaned down, closing the distance between them. "I'm not going anywhere, Dominic," she whispered, right before her lips met his. The kiss was desperate, bruising, and tasted like the ashes of their pasts and the promise of a dangerous, unbreakable future. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving a silent, snow-covered world in its wake, a world that now belonged entirely to them. Did this heart-pounding Mafia romance leave you on the edge of your seat? The collision of two entirely different worlds, a desperate waitress fighting to survive the winter, and a ruthless syndicate boss fighting for his family, proves that sometimes the most dangerous love stories are born in the darkest alleys. If Clara and Dominic's intense, high-stakes journey from freezing blizzards to burning mansions captivated you, don't keep it a secret. Hit that like button to show some love for Clara's fierce bravery and Dominic's unwavering protection. Share this video with your fellow romance and thriller lovers so they can experience the suspense, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We have dozens of gripping, dramatic, and intensely romantic stories just like this one coming your way. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the girls in? Let us know.